Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second session on the North Star Navigation to Career Empowerment. Resume discrimination, it really happens. And our featured speaker this afternoon is Ms. Paula Renee Bruner. Ms. Bruner is a college and law graduate of Howard University who served as a licensed appellate attorney in the EEOC's Office of General Counsel for 26 years, representing the EEOC in 10 of the 13 federal circuit courts as lead or amicus counsel in significant employment discrimination cases. She created legal arguments on several novel issues, including the racially discriminatory ban of dreadlocks, which has spearheaded corrective state and local legislation, and the gender discrimination exclusion of a transgendered funeral home director, whose case is now pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. She has also provided salient advice to EEOC trial attorneys, Justice Department counsel, and members of the private bars on arguments strategies. As a special assistant and attorney advisor to former EEOC Chair Naomi Earp, Ms. Bruner created the EEOC's National E-Race, which is Eradicating Racism and Colorism from Employment, to address traditional and contemporary race and color issues. In 2016, she joined the Office of Federal Operations Appellate Review Programs Unit as a writing attorney, where she resolves federal employee appeals and seeks to uphold the federal employment commitment to being a model employer in the area of anti-discrimination enforcement. In 2018, Acting Chair Victoria Lipnick appointed her to serve as the EEOC's agency representative on the White House Initiative for Historically Black Colleges and Universities, and in 2019, on the Employment Opportunities Task Force. During Ms. Bruner's legal career, she has served as a White House attorney advisor to President Clinton, the EEOC liaison and conference chairman for the National Employment Lawyers Association, and was the first staff attorney to become a judicial clerk at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit. She also taught over 200 first-year law students, first at Howard University School of Law, as a third-year law student, and then as the first recent graduate and youngest faculty member at the National Law Center, George Washington University. She is a godmother of 10, mentor to many, an active member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, a life member of the NAACP, sings on 2 choirs at the Reed Temple AME, and the sole proprietor of Paula's Purpose, a fashion accessory business. Her mantra is, "To much who is given, much is required." And she facilitates this creed through networking, collaboration, community building, and avidly avoiding reinventing the wheel. Without further ado, Ms. Paula Bruner.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to join us for this discussion on resume discrimination. It really happens. Just know, discrimination can occur anywhere during the employment process, but the most difficult area in which to eradicate and prove that discrimination has happened is during the application process. Next slide. Here we have a generic general purpose resume, which means it's not tailored to any specific position. I don't recommend following this layout or content for the reasons I outlined in my earlier resume writing presentation, but I encourage everyone to view if you've not done so. Excuse me. In 2007, EEOC launched E-Race, Eradicating Racism and Colorism from Employment. E-Race drew attention to contemporary issues of race and color discrimination in the employment process and in the workplace. Resume discrimination was one of the focal points of the E-Race initiative. If you wish to learn more about E-Race, you can go to the website address on this slide, and also there's a handout available in our virtual booth. I also encourage you, if you want to learn more about discrimination and the forms it may take, to view the Youth at Work video in the EEOC's booth to see how discrimination can manifest in the workplace, especially against youth and young adults. Next slide. So going back to resume discrimination, how does it manifest and where does it start? Well, it starts here in the resume and the structure. Why? Your resume is your sales pitch. Your resume is your gateway to getting an interview and ultimately the job. So the first thing the employer receives is an application or a resume from you on which you have provided information and personal details about yourself. Often, discrimination in the hiring process begins at the application stage. If you've seen the resume PowerPoint presentation, you know that there are 4 general sections of a resume: the contact information, the person's educational achievements, their work experience, and then sometimes a miscellaneous section. The employer or the employer screening agent, if they have biases, can use this information to engage in unlawful discrimination. Next slide. The contact information is the first information that the hiring official or screener reads about you, and it provides your name, address, email address, and phone number. And what could be problematic about that? Well, research, scholarly studies, and litigation have uncovered that an applicant's name may be the basis for unlawful discrimination. Several years ago, the TV show 2020 put 22 pairs of Black or ethnic sounding and white sounding names with identical resumes. That means the credentials, the academic achievements, the experiences, the hobbies, all of that were the same on the resume. And 2020 put it to test. Those resumes that had what they called white sounding names included Molly, Amy, Madeline, Abigail, Jenna, Connor, Wyatt, Cody, and Logan. The Black sounding names included Ebony, Diamond, Jasmine, Amani, Shanice, Deshawn, Marquis, Darnell, Jamal, and of course, Tyrone, which interestingly, I was told, relates back to the popularity of a Caucasian actor named Tyrone Power, who was considered a sexy swashbuckler of the 50s and appeared in films like Mark of the Zorro. As a note, one name that in contemporary times that crosses races and gender is Jordan. Its popularity, interestingly, is tied to a Black man, Michael Jordan, who played for the Chicago Bulls and won them 6 NBA championships. Next slide. 2020 found that resumes with white sounding names were downloaded 17% more often than resumes with Black sounding names. Next slide. In 2019, the National Bureau of Economic Research reported that name discrimination continues to occur in hiring. It followed a field experiment that had been conducted by 2 University of Chicago researchers who found that after sending resumes in response to help wanted ads in Boston and Chicago newspapers that exhibited the same work experience and educational achievements, but only differed by names, the resumes with white sounding names elicited 50% more callbacks than those with Black names. As you can see on the resume, if you want to check my stats, there is a link to the data and the article. Next slide. Employers, we have found, often screen out resumes that have difficult to pronounce names, as well as those that have ethnic names. They do this by inputting a formula in the screening system that may identify not only certain names, but names that have a certain number of vowels together or consonants or a combination of vowels and consonants. What impact does this have? Well, if in fact the employer said it did not want to hire anyone with any combination of the letters H, Z, W, Y, or with more than 3 vowels in a row or 3 vowels in the name, names that would be flagged would include Oprah Winfrey, Kim and Khloe Kardashian. Why? Well, Oprah Winfrey has W and a Y in her name. Kardashians have several vowels. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the actor and former governor of California, he has a W and a Z in his last name. So despite his accomplishments, he would be screened out. Coster Waldo Nicolai, the gentleman who played Jaime in the Game of Thrones. He was a popular actor, Game of Thrones when it was popular. Gabourey Sidibe, the star of Precious and Empire. Anthony Scaramucci, the short-lived White House communications director. Why? Because of the number of vowels as well as consonants in his name. Next slide. So as you can see, this type of system would not only impact persons of color and ethnic persons, but persons of color, but it can also impact different ethnicities. Employers have also used computer software to screen out candidates who live in certain racial, ethnic, or religious enclaves. So we have address and zip code discrimination. For example, if an employer doesn't want any residents of a Korean neighborhood in a New York area to be considered for a position, a software system could be programmed to exclude the street names associated with this community or the zip codes. This too is still intentional discrimination, and again, very difficult to prove because, to be honest, only insiders, employees, IT employees, or participants in the practice would really know and had proof that this is happening. The applicant is just simply uploading their resume online to a system or to a link, and they don't know what's going on once it is passed on to the employer. So one of the reasons why this practice continues almost with impunity is because unless someone finally decides to report the practices and brings it to the commission's attention, we don't know that it's actually happening. But if in fact someone is aware of such practices, we encourage you to file a discrimination charge if it has impacted you, or to report the practice to the EEOC so that we could address it. Because people talk, sometimes this illegal practice comes to light when applicants of the same protected traits realize that none of them, despite applying, were interviewed or hired. Here is an example of how zip code discrimination can occur. On the screen is a map of Washington, D.C. based on current demographics and despite gentrification. A software program that targeted for exclusion addresses in D.C. communities of Congress Heights, Anacostia, Deanwood, and even Trinidad would negatively impact African-American residents. And software targeting zip codes associated with Columbia Heights, Petworth, and Adams Morgan could disparately impact Hispanic residents as well. Employers also have used resume information identifying an applicant's affiliation with HBCUs, minority-based organizations such as the Hispanic Bar Association or the NAACP, or Black fraternities and sororities as a basis for discrimination. At least one court has recognized that these factors can serve as a proxy for race to exclude members of that protected group in the hiring process, and that such action is illegal. This case was brought against Target by the EEOC. We'll call it a story of 3 Black female job applicants, even though there were actually other applicants. But a lot of the evidence that we received that helped us bring this case and make us decide to bring this case was offered by these 3 Black female job applicants. So the EEOC brought the case on behalf of all the affected African-American applicants. But again, the 3 featured ones were Sharice Brown Easley, Raphael Edgiston, and Kalisha White. In this case, we had 2 college students from Marquette University, Sharice Brown Easley and Raphael Edgiston, who had participated in a University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee job fair. On Sharice's resume, she listed that she was a member of the Metropolitan Milwaukee Alliance of Black School Educators under the heading of professional memberships. And on Raphael's resume, she noted that she was an African-American studies major, that she had membership in the NAACP and Alpha Kappa Alpha, and a Black sorority, and that she had published a paper titled The African-American Response to School Choice in Milwaukee. Now, I'll note that the NAACP's membership is more diverse and isn't just African-Americans, but again, the predominant number happened to be. Similarly so with those who may major in African-American studies. Yes, anyone can major in that area, but the likelihood is that a person majoring in that area, particularly in combination with the other features of Raphael's resume, was that this person was probably African-American or of African descent. Next slide. These young ladies engaged in Sharice and Raphael engaged in a preliminary screen with the Target reps at the University of Wisconsin Job Fair and were signed up to receive interviews following their preliminary screen where they had shared already their credentials. They were provided a phone number of the interviewer to call and to schedule and confirm their interview appointments. Both women called, but the interviewing official said that he was too busy to schedule their interviews. And despite repeated calls, neither ever obtained a callback from the interviewing official, and thus no interview. During litigation, the interviewing official said he didn't remember receiving any calls from them. Next slide. Kalisha White was the 3rd student, and she was an MBA student at Marquette. She had applied directly to Target's management program. Her resume also indicated that she was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, and she had received an email inviting her to call and schedule an interviewer. Unfortunately, she was also told by the same interviewing official who told Kalisha and Raphael he was too busy, that he was too busy to schedule her interview as well. But that's not, fortunately, how the story ends. Here's a caveat. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. And you should probably test the process. Next slide. So in this instance, Kalisha became suspicious, and she decided to test the process and resubmitted her resume in a dumbed down and revised fashion. She removed her academic achievements, changed the resume name to Sarah Brucknell, which she viewed as a white sounding name or Caucasian sounding name. She changed the address to one associated with a white community and left her real phone number on the resume. She then faxed this revised resume to the Target interviewer. Within 5 to 10 minutes, the interviewer called and left a voicemail message asking for Sarah to come in for an interview. Hearing his message, Kalisha called the official as herself, Kalisha, but was again told he was too busy to schedule an interview. So she then asked a white friend in her dormitory to pretend to be Sarah and call the interviewer. Sarah called, The official accepted the call, interviewed her, and extended a job offer. Kalisha, on the other hand, never received a return call from the interviewer. These three women filed discrimination charges with the EEOC based on their experience with Target. Target argued it was impossible for the interviewing official to have discriminated against them since he had never met them. Moreover, Target argued it was an equal opportunity employer. And despite testimony from an expert on racially affiliated dialects who stated that after listening to the women read statements, their voices were discernibly African American, which could have motivated the interviewing official to reject them even though he had never met them. But unfortunately, the trial court dismissed the complaint. Next slide. But fortunately, we have a happy ending. The EEOC hopes for progress in this area. A 2015 study by a University of Missouri professor suggested that positive racial progress was possible when he compared employers' reactions to 4 names, 2 white-sounding, 1 male, 1 female, and 2 black-sounding, 1 male, 1 female, and found no discrimination among the employers. For example, when a study compared Bria versus Allison, little distinction was noted, but a 2017 researcher was not convinced. He asserts that Bria by itself is not a strong signal of Blackness. It's actually a more universal name. However, he believes if paired with the last name Jefferson or Washington, which are commonly associated with the Black community, the results may be different. On appeal, we found that the federal court sided with the women. The court ruled it was possible that not only their voices, but their names and their resume information revealing that they were associated with African American organizations could have indicated that they were African American themselves. Further, the interviewing official admitted that he knew AK was a Black sorority and that NAACP was a Black organization, which was in the court's finding sufficient to support their claim that he could have known their race when he refused to interview them, even though he had never met them. As a consequence, after the Court of Appeals reinstated the case, Target settled for $510,000. So what's the takeaway here? Names are revealing. And as a best practice tip, I encourage you to use your best judgment because a name doesn't necessarily define you. And I say not necessarily because some of us carry names that are the third, where we are carrying on our father or our forebears' names. And if they were wonderful, courageous, admirable people, we do want it to define us because we're walking in great footsteps. But overall, one's name generally does not define you, which is why we see people like Barack, Oprah, Denzel, and even Professor Marijuana Pepsi Van Dyke all become successful despite having unusual or ethnic sounding names. So race can become a factor even if one's actual race is never mentioned. And here we had names in the Target case that signaled race. Kalisha and Raphael and Sharice may have, signaled race in that regard. But you can be flexible. Some people have used initials not only to conceal ethnicity, but also gender. One example is J.K. Rowling, who purposely used her initials when she sought a company to pick up her Harry Potter's series because she was concerned that if they thought she was a woman writing about science fiction, that they might not, and this being also a more unique form of science fiction, that they might not pick her up. Others have used race-neutral middle names. So I use mine in this instance. Not that Paula isn't race-neutral too, but just as an example, Renee, Bruner. Some of you may be too young to know this, but when actor Lawrence Fishburne, who now plays the militant father figure on the series Blackish, started his movie career, the credits always identified him as Larry Fishburne. But once he became a go-to or established revenue-generating actor, he immediately requested that his actual first name, rather than the assigned nickname, be used in credits, movie credits. And Samuel Jackson of Pulp Fiction and Django, another movie star, did the same thing. If you really want the job or a coveted opportunity, it may require you to be flexible, so long as the person isn't calling you a disparaging or humiliating name, or even discriminatory one. Know that once the job is secured, you can demand what you want to be called, and you don't have to settle for unwelcome nicknames or mispronounced names. Just to give you an idea, there was a case I handled where a Black male employee was referred to as, my God, name went right out of my head. Cornelius. I'm sorry, Cornelius. And he was a new employee, and a coworker, Caucasian coworker, would talk about Cornelius in his presence. And no one knew who Cornelius was, including the Black man, the new Black male employee, because that wasn't his name. And being new, he just assumed that the person, that this coworker was just talking about someone he had not yet met. But another Black employee who had been there a while and was also a union rep pulled the white coworker to the side and said, who are you talking about when you keep referring to Cornelius? And the coworker revealed that he was referring to the new Black employee because he thought he looked like the character in Planet of the Apes, who was named Cornelius, and that he looked like a gorilla or a monkey to him. And the union rep informed him that that was inappropriate and that he should stop it. And then he went on to and report the situation to the supervisor. The supervisor, in turn, informed the new Black employee of the situation, and he became angry, and things took a turn for the left that ultimately resulted in him being disciplined. But I mentioned that because that's one of the cases we handle involving code words, where sometimes code words, in this instance, Cornelius, in some other instances, Fred, are used to refer to persons of a certain racial group as code when you can, so that you can talk in front of them without revealing that you're talking about them. And these are things that also happen in the employment workplace, that can constitute employment discrimination. So again, in that instance, that coworker was disciplined as well, and was charged with being forbidden to use that reference of Cornelius any longer. And so, if you were to learn that someone was calling you out of your name, and particularly in a racially disparaging fashion, you don't have to consent to that and or submit to it. But I wouldn't encourage you to fight about it either. Next slide. As students or graduates of HBCUs, of course, we have to list them on our resumes. As was mentioned in my bio, I have 2 degrees from Howard University, my college and my law degree, and I'm very proud of them. And I do list them on my resume. And, at this point, it's kind of like one of those things where If you want me, you want me. And if you don't, then that's not where I belong anyway. But what you can do to minimize any potential employers who may be scanning for certain things of that nature to engage in discrimination, you can consider putting your education section at the end of your resume. Most times, when you're first coming out of school, that's usually your most greatest accomplishment, is that you got the degree, and you might have some honors activities associated with it and some other academic accomplishments that you want to promote. And that's a good thing as well. And so in that instance, you may put it at the beginning. But if in fact you have obtained work experience, and that's kind of what the employer is really looking for, then consider putting your education section at the end of or the bottom of your resume, so that they actually get to hone in on what you've done, what you've accomplished, what your credentials are, what your skill sets are. And then when they get to your education section, oh, this is an HBCU grad, they already are so impressed, it doesn't make a difference. The other thing is, keep in mind that one of the excellent things about this White House initiative on HBCUs, and why you should be proud of your HBCU affiliation, is that of the 34 agencies associated and supporting the HBCU initiative, as we were assigned by the Secretary of Education, we are looking to integrate HBCU students and graduates into our federal programs, into our federal agencies. And so that's where it becomes a boon to make sure that you mention you're a student or graduate of an HBCU, because they'll be looking at these resumes for that purpose as well. And if you don't want to, and you might want to also reiterate it in your cover letter, because oftentimes if you're sending physical documents, the cover letters first and then the resume, you might want to mention that you're an HBCU student or graduate when seeking internship, fellowships, or employment opportunities to any of our 34 agencies that support this initiative. If you're not a recent graduate, or you lack notable academic accomplishments, putting your education at the end of the resume is also helpful. And that way they can just, the employer or the screening agent can focus immediately on your work experience and earn qualifications before they make any kind of prejudicial or biased judgments about your academic association. The other thing is, in the education section, as you refer to your various organizations, I have found one, because my mantra is one-page resumes are preferable, that rather than listing if you belong to multiple organizations, every organization you've ever belonged to during your 4 years, or 7 or 8 if you've gone on to professional school, organizations, list only those organizations that are relevant to the job you're seeking. And even if not relevant, if you've held leadership positions, if you were the president, if you were the chairman, if you are seeking a financial position and you were the treasurer for your organization, those are the ones you want to highlight. All others you can save for the interview. You can and to add to fleshing out, what attributes you bring to the table, what's unique about you. Save it for the interview. And also consider that if you are listing organizations and affiliations on your resume, and let's say you were the president of your sorority, and your sorority is a Black Greek letter organization such as Alpha Kappa Alpha. Yes, you want to list that, and you want to note that you were the president, you were the treasurer, you were the vice president. But I also highly encourage you to list other organizations that are not ethnically tied or racially tied. One, it helps to show that diversity and your ability to interact with all types of people, which we know all types of people attend HBCUs. From all different walks of life, from all ethnic backgrounds, from all racial backgrounds. Lastly, again, if your race-based affiliations are not pertinent to the job you're pursuing, save it for the interview. Next slide. So best practice tip, consider reorganizing or neutralizing your resume. Placement is key. Have balance, show diversity where possible. Save other information for the interview. Now, limiting your contact information. This applies, in different contexts. Traditionally, applicants will include their addresses on a resume. And as I stated earlier, we can, the software can use addresses or zip codes associated with certain racial, ethnic, or religious communities to delete your resume from consideration. So what you might want to consider doing is omitting the address, or and not just the zip code, omitting the address itself. And knowing that many requests for interviews are either made by email or phone. So if you were to list your name and your email address and phone number, that would be sufficient contact information for an employer that wants to follow up with you based on the credentials they read on your resume. At the resume stage, there's really no need for the employer to know exactly where you live, now that we don't do as much through postal service. Of course, when you get the interview or the job, they may want to know in the event they need to mail follow-up materials to you. But more importantly, you can always provide this contact information at the interview or during the job offer. Next slide. Be aware. A relatively new frontier of resumes that I just want to address are video resumes. Video resumes have been used by certain public face industries such as broadcasting, television, social media services, and it requires a greater access to video recording tools and helps to decrease the expense of travel. Hence, video resumes have become the 21st century approach to job hunting. And employers claim that they can readily assess personality and oratory skills while evaluating the applicant's qualification, which is why some of them prefer video resumes. But what I found during the Erase initiative is that video resumes can also contribute to discriminatory or biased decisions. To be clear, video resumes on their face are not illegal, but they are like pictures in that they can reveal protected traits. And be aware, pictures an employer requiring pictures during the application process in many states is actually against the law. So if they can't require pictures, they shouldn't be requiring video resumes. Video resumes can reveal protected traits about the applicant, such as race, color, national origin, gender, age, disabilities, and even religion if the person is wearing religious attire or jewelry, such as a cross or a yarmulke. Such disclosures could negatively and discriminatorily influence the hiring process in a way that paper or online document resumes do not. The other thing to keep in mind is that video resumes can have a disparate impact on certain age groups, racial groups, or ethnic groups because of the communities that actually don't have cyber cafes, don't have ready access to computers, as we're even seeing now with many educational situations where the students don't have the access to remotely attend school for everyone in their household the way that they may be able to if they were in a different school system or a different community or a different economic circumstance. In case you're unfamiliar with video resumes, unfortunately, I'm not able to play the resume of the person that I had found, but you can see from just the picture that you can discern the race, color, sex, national origin, and even possibly the age of the applicant. And if any of these particular categories are disfavored by the employer, it could lead to unlawful discrimination in hiring because the employer could decide, I don't want any brown people. I don't want any person that's of a certain ethnicity. I don't want a male. I don't want a person of that age. Now, I will put a caveat with respect to the age, and that is that our laws, our federal laws, only offer legal protections to people who are 40 and older. Unfortunately, at this time, there's still no protections for younger persons, even though younger persons may feel that they are victims of discrimination because they are young. There are no existing laws that protect you from that kind of discriminating behavior. So it is not illegal. But if you are a non-traditional student who may be 40 and older, and you feel that a video resume could reveal your age because of the video, you could be subject to unlawful age discrimination. So what do we do in a scenario? Well, a best practice tip that I've offered employers is that they permit the applicant to submit a paper or online resume in addition to the video resume. And I encourage those employers requesting these video resumes to first view the documented resume to assess your qualifications, educational achievement, work experience, and accomplishments before focusing on your physical attributes that may be revealed in the video. I offer them this advice because if they can actually attest to having done that when they decide to view your video, it can be a defense to an accusation of discrimination, because they can say, well, no, we looked at the resume, the documented resume. We didn't like what we saw. We went on to see if maybe the video would impress us further, and we weren't impressed. But it offers both the applicant and the employer another layer of protection, so that, because it could go differently, the employer could decide they're extremely impressed after reading the paper or online resume, and then make additional decisions after viewing the video. Also, keep in mind, the documented resume may actually be a quicker read for the employer who may be burrowed in hundreds of resumes and applications for the job, and may not have time to view a video resume. Next slide. So final takeaway, be aware of not only all the things we covered, but that employers with diversity statements in their bios do discriminate too. A May 2017 article titled "Minorities Who Quote Unquote Whiten Their Job Resumes Get More Interviews" revealed that, quote, employers claiming to be pro-diversity discriminated against resumes with racial references just as much as employers who didn't mention diversity at all in their job ads. And if you recall, when I was telling you about the Target case that the commission brought, Target maintained that it couldn't possibly be a discriminating organization because it was an equal opportunity employer. And as a matter of principle, that may have been true, but it didn't stop the interviewer from engaging in race discrimination against those 3 Black female applicants. Keep in mind, discrimination is driven and executed by people, individuals, not principals. Thus, applicants still may encounter hiring officials who possess unlawful biases against groups that are different from them, even though the company may have a different stance. I hope that you found this information helpful on resume discrimination, and I thank you for your precious time. I wish you much success in your employment search, and I encourage you to contact the EEOC if you ever feel that you're a victim of any form of discrimination, whether it's during the application process, during the or even once you are an employee in the workplace. I also encourage you to view different vignettes that were featured in the Youth at Work video in our booth, so that, and to download the handouts for the Youth at Work and Erase initiatives, so that you can learn more about how to address and identify different forms of discrimination that may manifest in the employment setting. Thank you, and we will now open the floor to questions and answers. I turn it back over to you, Michelle.
Checking the chat box. I don't see any questions. Checking with colleagues to see if they are seeing any chat questions coming up in the chat room as well.
Well, as a final last word, I'm going to borrow advice I heard from a former HBCU scholar, Nathalie Nelson Parker, who spoke earlier during the HBCU student panel. And I'd like to amplify something that she said about when going forward, carry 4 Ps in your pocket. I actually identified or added a 5th one, but starting out with her 4, I would say, identify your potential. If you have an entrepreneurial spirit, you know that your strengths that you can build on are in the area of argumentation, math acuity. Use that as your initial platform in identifying what disciplines, what professions, what industry you want to explore, and then pursue your purpose. For me, my purpose was always to educate. Yes, I'm a lawyer. That was ultimately the vocation that I pursued, but my purpose was always to share knowledge with those who lack and or those who needed to know. So even in my litigation stance, when I went before judges that I felt had no connection to the victim experiences, to what it's like to be the only one, to what it's like to be the first one in breaking gender and racial and ethnic barriers, to what it's like to have a certain disability, to what it's like to seek promotions, to seek job opportunities, and to be denied because of physical attributes that over which you have no control. These were, in my mind, opportunities not only just to invite a discourse about the law as it was already established, but to add to the law some flesh and bones about how this actually plays out on humanity, these kind of impediments in the workplace, these kind of discriminatory barriers and that we're seeking to eradicate. And then engage your passion. You know, mine was to obtain justice. I always tried to seek fairness and civility and respect. And that just was something I did in every venue. I'd be the first person to jump into the fray when I felt someone was being disadvantaged or unfairly treated, even if it wasn't my battle. So that ultimately became a part of my makeup professionally. And then establish your people being those professional and personal contacts that can help you grow, that can help you, that can encourage you when you're trying to pursue certain seemingly unattainable obstacles. I mean, not unattainable goals is what I'm trying to say. And then finally, be persistent. Discrimination is one of those things that can serve as a deterrent, or it can serve as a gateway to success, because sometimes it's in those negative experiences that we grow, we mature, we learn to better navigate our employment situations, and ultimately we may become positioned to make a difference and to change how things are handled, how people are treated. And so I encourage you to never let any no's negate your destiny, that you don't let that you know that some denials are just merely deferrals, and that some setbacks are setups for better opportunities. And so if I have no questions, I will end on that note, and thank you for a great day.
Thank you so much, Paula.